Susan Borke has been teaching negotiation techniques to business professionals for over 30 years. And these are skills that she honed while working at CBS, at National Geographic, in legal and financial administration. And like I said, she comes with the full endorsement and praise of Kelly Leonard. And we are just very pleased to have you. I don't want to take any more of our precious time. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Welcome, Susan. We're very pleased to have you.
What I want to talk about today is really three different things. I want to talk about recognizing opportunities to negotiate, adopting a successful mindset for your negotiations, and then implementing a strategy. So that's going to be what we're going to be talking about. So the first question I have for you, and if you put these things in the chat, I'll be able to read them out. And the question is, when does an opportunity to negotiate arise? The opportunities to negotiate, as you've noticed, abound. There are many of them. They happen every way, every day. And fundamentally, it's whenever one person makes a request of another person that creates the opportunity to negotiate. So along those lines, there is the opportunity to negotiate, and there is whether you choose to negotiate to take advantage of that opportunity. So what happens, and the reason I'm emphasizing opportunity so much, is that we kind of tend to be very binary creatures, we humans, and we tend to think of things as go, no go. So when somebody makes a request, we immediately, think in terms of, is it a yes or is it a no? And that can be fine. And there are tons of requests, like, can I have the remote? The answer is no, right? There are tons of requests that can be answered very quickly with a yes or no. But there are many requests that really would benefit from a little bit more inquiry. And so, for example, if your manager comes to you and says, I'd really like you to work on this project, you're feeling stressed, you're feeling like you need to give your manager an immediate answer. And that pressure causes you to maybe answer when what you really would be best served by is a question. So if the question is, when is this project due? Or even, what does this project involve? Or if you know what the project, you know enough about it, then maybe it's saying, are there ways to change the deadlines on other things I'm working on so that I can do this and still meet my obligations? So those kinds of questions can help you really understand whether this request, this opportunity to negotiate, is one that you actually want to negotiate. Or maybe you just don't want to do it, and then it's simple. The answer is no. I used to say, as an attorney, when people would come to me with, things they wanted approved, if you want a fast answer, the fast answer is no. If you want a yes, that takes longer. So working with people to get to yes takes some time. The traditional way of saying what's a successful negotiation is that, in fact, all parties are equally unhappy. That's sort of an old school approach to negotiations. And I'm going to give you some tools that'll help you move away from that. Everyone equally happy is a lovely thought, but often pretty difficult to attain because different people have different definitions of happiness. So what I look for in a negotiation is, how do we maximize the value? And the way we can maximize value is that it's the most efficient disposition of resources. Everybody's gotten as much as they can out of this. And it's interesting how this perspective works, because the fact is that the research that negotiation, academics have done, and as they set these things up and measure, people tend to leave up to 47% of the value in a negotiation on the table. So really taking it, you can, anything you do to do better than that, right, is going to be good for you and good for the other people in the negotiation. So that kind of a mindset is really important. And the mindset of having one where you're focused on a negotiation as a problem-solving process. Okay, that's what's going to make you a more effective negotiator. It's a different mindset than thinking about it as a win-lose proposition. Because when you're focused on solving a problem, then everybody at the table is involved in that. And then you start moving towards constructive collaboration. I've been doing this a long time, and I really do understand that some people come to the table without this kind of a mindset. They want to win. They want all, they want all the toys. And those people can be a challenge to negotiate with. However, that doesn't mean you have to give up on what you're trying to achieve. Remember, everybody leaves value on the table. And the more competitive they are, the more likely they are to leave value. And that value that they're leaving is value you can pick up. The other thing is to understand that when somebody's a very competitive negotiator, so they really need to feel like they've won, then every time you make any, you're going to make any move towards them on any point, you need to make them feel like they have extracted a rib from you, right? That they have been so tough that they've really, made you suffer, even if it's something that you would care less about giving up. Because that way, when you're done, they'll have to believe you're done because they know they've extracted so much from you along the way. So keep that in mind. You can with other skills that you learn through if you work with me in the future or through interacting, using your marketing skills that you learn at school or skills of persuasion, there are ways of working with people who need to feel like they've gotten everything. Now, I want to talk about a strategic negotiating process. So that was the last element, and that's what we're going to spend the rest of today on. And in that strategic negotiating process, the success cycle looks like this. The first phase, the first part of it, is that you have two phases. You have the preparation, what you do by yourself, and then you have the engaging, what you do when you're actually with your counterpart. So every negotiation should have a preparation phase and an engaging phase. Now, if you don't do any preparation, then there's no preparation phase, and you'll really be at a disadvantage. In fact, people say, well, what if I prepare and the other party prepares? And again, the research shows that when both parties prepare, they both end up with more value than if neither of them prepares. And of course, the party who prepares always ends up with more value than the party who hasn't. So preparation is really important. And the first step of preparation is research. And there are lots of things you do through that research process. That's the first step. Now, as you finish your research and you're looking to move into, how are you going to engage effectively, then you start getting into the part of this that is rehearse. And that's where you're going to think about how you're going to engage and develop the skills to engage effectively with your counterparty. When you're in the room, on the phone, on the Zoom, whatever it is with your counterparty, then you're at the relate stage. So you're relating to this person, and this is where part of the negotiation occurs, of course, not all of it, because actually the research and rehearsing is still part of that negotiation. Once you're done, you hang up the phone, you disconnect from Zoom, you walk out of the room, is that reflecting phase. And it's an incredibly important one, because without that, you have no idea what preparation you need to do next. Now, there's certainly some transactions that are one and done, and some negotiations that are very transactional that way. You go into the market overseas, you're in a big, busy market and you want to buy some fruit, and you bargain for the fruit. That's a negotiation, and you walk away at the end of it with the fruit, and the merchant has your money. Many other negotiations, though, go through this cycle of preparation and engagement more than once. So that's you're probably the ones we're going to be talking about are more like the latter, where you're going through this cycle and you're going around it a couple times. So for the purposes of today, let's think about compensation. All right. So whether you're thinking about asking for a raise, or whether you're in it, you're in the interviewing process for a position and you're involved in those negotiations, you might have an offer and you want to negotiate the offer. So let's use that. So now we're in the research button that was in the original model, and we're going to talk about interests. And the first thing we want to do is understand what interests are and what they are relative to positions. So positions are what we say we want. Interests are the needs and values that lie beneath the surface. And what you really need to think about is this is what we know about icebergs, right? They can be really big on top, but there's a whole hidden part of the iceberg that is underneath the surface of the water. And the positions are what is on the surface, is what you can easily see. It's what the person says, I have to make $50,000, I have to make $80,000, right? That's the salary I want for this position. Or the hiring manager who says, we have a budget and we can't pay you more than $70,000, or whatever the magic number is that's being discussed. Those are all positions and the way you can tell a position is that it ends with a yes or no, right? I want to make $80,000. Well, the answer to that is yes, that's great, you're hired, or no, we don't have a budget for that. That's a problem, right? So it becomes a yes or no answer. The thing about interests is that they don't respond. There isn't really a yes or no response to an interest. If you say, I'm working through my budget, and I'm trying to, I need compensation that's going to allow me to meet my expenses and my obligations, as well as provide, a little money to pay for some rest and recreation during the year. So, that's one part of what goes into what I'm looking at for compensation. At the same time, I want to know that I'm being paid a competitive salary for the kind of position in the market, in the Washington, D.C. market in this area. So all those things, no one can say, no, you shouldn't, no, you can't have a competitive salary. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So to have an interest in a salary that reflects your, experience and value, that's kind of, that is what an interest looks like. And it's not something it's difficult for somebody to say, well, no, you can't have compensation that reflects your experience in roles, that feed into this, or perhaps other experience you've had. So you want to be clear. You want to start thinking about what is the value? What are you bringing to this? And also, what do you need to get from it? Is it professional recognition? Is it, you need to make a certain income because you have financial, school loans, mortgage, rent, whatever it is, there are things you have to do. If vacation is important to you, that may be something that if there's only 2 weeks of vacation and you have to work on federal holidays because of the kind of industry it is, that may be, what you may really want to do is be able to get more vacation, perhaps. And that's more important to you even than a certain element of the cash compensation. So those things all feed into each other, and you really want to think about what are your interests. Now, before you can think about your interests, you're going to have to go through the process of identifying the positions, right? Because even ourselves, what we tend to do is think about our positions. So if we're looking at a compensation situation, right? What are the positions that people are going to take? So you can think about that in the chat. And there's a question in the chat that I think is a valid one at this point in our discussion. So while you're thinking about what positions people have when you're doing a promotion negotiation or a job negotiation, So help me, maybe think about that. The question is, are interests explicit in negotiations? And interests are usually not explicit in negotiations. You have to excavate them. Part of your preparation for a negotiation is to fill in the blocks that I'm looking at in these triangles. So the first one is to think about what your positions are. You want to have X amount of money. You want so much vacation. You want to have, maybe a commuting credit. You want to have a 401k, some kind of savings plan. You want medical benefits. Those are all things these are positions, because they're a yes or no. The job has medical benefits or it doesn't. The job offers a certain salary or it doesn't, if that's what you're looking at. Then you want to think about, in your own head, you want to put yourself in the hiring, or your manager, if it's a promotion, your manager, and what are their positions going to be, right? Their positions are going to be, we have budget limitations. Their positions are, certain things are not within my authority to negotiate. So for example, different companies have different retirement savings plans, right? And sometimes a company might have a match, and the match might become available to somebody only after they've been at the company for, say, a year. Okay, you're not going to be able to negotiate a match after 60, sorry. You're not going to be able to negotiate a match after 6 months. All right, those kinds of policies are non-negotiable for anybody, because they have to be standard for all employees across the company. On the other hand, there may be no moving allowance, right? The company may say they don't pay for moving. However, what you might be able to talk to them about is a signing bonus. All right. For you, you don't care what it's called as long as you get cash to help cover your cost of moving. So that's an interest. The interest is you want to get your moving costs covered. But if you ask for it, that's a position. I need help with, I want to know what I want to know how much I'll get for moving. And the answer to that position is nothing, perhaps. Or, we have we can offer you a maximum of X. So understanding the positions that are at play, those are the first things people are going to say. So the offer letter, that's a position. When you get the terms of the promotion, or what would be required for you to be promoted, those are all positions. Now I want you to go below that, right? We're going to go below the surface, and we're going to get the big, much more interesting things, which are, what are the underlying interests? So when you think about and this is where you start getting into the interesting part of it. You think about, what are your counterparty's interests? So they've made you an offer of employment. They've made you an offer of employment. What are their interests? What do they want? What do they need? They need someone to fill that position. Absolutely. And do the job. Yes. They want somebody to add value. They want a match. That you match what they're looking for, that they need your knowledge and skills. You're exactly right. Those see their needs, right? They see you as a potential employee. More than a potential employee, they want you to be an employee because they've made you an offer. Okay. So they've gone through a whole process. Not only did they spend all the time they spent with you, but they spent that same amount of time with several other people, and you're their first choice, right? Or you're their choice at this point. So, and if you're not their first choice, let's say you're their second or third choice, listen, that means that they've already extended offers and they have had people turn them down. So they really are, they really need you in a way more than they did, because the pool of competent candidates is getting a little smaller, or they have to start the process all over. So that set of interests, though, is that they really want to fill the position, and they think you're the best person to do it. So you've more, leverage than you think, even in a bad market. Now, we happen to be in a very employee-centric market right now, and that's the good news. So I would definitely, keep that in mind. they not only are going to want you to come, but they're also going to want you to stay. That's going to be important as well. So when you look at what your interests are, which is you want the job, you want to find a place where where your skills and your experience is going to be valued and you'll be able to grow and stay. You want compensation that reflects the marketplace. Those are all things that are your interests. If we talk about what your counterparty, your employer's interests are, they want an employee who has skills, the skills to perform an experience that will enable them to perform the job effectively. They want somebody who's going to be, is going to stay for a period of time, a certain stability, and they want to stay within their financial constraints, whatever they are. So there are things within those two sets of interests. There are some that are common and some that are not. So if you think about it, certainly your range, what you want in terms of compensation and what their budget constraints are may or may not have any overlap. All right. We hope they do, right? Because if they don't, there's not a whole lot that's going to go on unless they can come up with some other benefits that'll be meaningful to you. But that one, we're going to assume there's some overlap. And if we think about the other interests we've talked about, we can start seeing where there are shared interests. Like you want a job, they want a person. You've got these you want a place where your experience and qualifications are going to be used and, you can grow, and they want somebody who has the skills and qualifications to do enough of the job, right? Maybe, employers always sort of wish they could hire people who could do 100% of the job from day one. But the fact of the matter is that if they also want stability, they really should be hiring, and they do know this, they need to be hiring somebody who can do the key, can come in and learn, can do the key elements, the necessary things, right, of the job early, and then can grow into the other aspects of it. Because the growing into the other aspects of it is what keeps somebody in the job and gives you stability over a period of time. So we have some common interests when we look at this, and that's where things get, much more interesting. If you start in your negotiation where there are common interests and you can begin to identify them. So as you're moving into the conversation with, you're actually engaging with your counterparty, starting that conversation kind of with a curiosity to see, if you can adopt or identify some of the common interests. So, you're able to say, it seems to me that, I'm pleased you've made me the offer. I feel, it seems like it's a good match. The needs of the job seem to fit with my skills and experience. And somebody was, ideally the person you're talking with is like, yes, we think you're a strong candidate for this job, which is why we've made you the offer. That's what you're looking to confirm, that there's a certain, and certainly you can say, one of the things that's very important to me is that I'm being paid, competitively within the market, for this kind of a position in our geographical area. And certainly I would expect, right, that as an employer, you would want to make sure that you're offering competitive compensation, because, otherwise it's a lot harder to find good people to do the work. And again, this is the kind of thing that your counterparty has a hard time disagreeing with. There may be some hemming and hawing about, well, we need to make sure we stay within our budget, and maybe we're not as big as some of the other, players in this area. But they're going to have a hard time saying that, denying the fact that whatever the competitive market environment is, they need to consider. So those are things that are going to help you lay a foundation of commonality with the person you're negotiating with. And you want to start thinking about how can you find out what's really important to them. Because they may, you want to get a sense of where your strengths are and can fit into that. So even as you've talked, as you talked through the interview process, you may have found out that they were more interested in somebody who has a lot of social media background, or that's where they're seeing the growth. So you're then being able to reinforce the fact that you have social media background, or maybe you have a marketing background that's more communications oriented, and you've been taking courses that have given you, the opportunity to develop social media skills. And you're in a position where you can now, grow in that area in this job, which would encourage you to stay longer because you want to get that experience. These are the kinds of things that'll help inform your discussion. If they're in fact not as interested in that, or this is, the emphasis of the position is different, you're going to want to get curious about what their interests are and what they're looking for. Are they looking for somebody who's going to stay in the position and be able to move up within the organization? Or are these positions that they see as being, short-term, people hold them for a couple years and then move on in the industry? Okay. And everything's different. So you want to get a sense of that. When as you get this idea, you begin to really understand your counterparty's interests, you're going to then be able to talk about options. And what options are possible agreements or parts of an agreement. So let me back up a minute and kind of get us back to where we're looking at interests and then thinking about how options play into that. Here's the situation I'm going to give you. We have a situation where there is one orange and two children. All right, so you've got two children and you're holding the orange, and both children are saying, I want the orange. I want the orange. I want the orange. So what are you going to do? This is a chat question. What do you do when you've got two children and one orange? You split the orange, okay? You can cut the orange into slices. You can split it in half, okay? You can cut it in half. If these are children who are old enough to handle a knife, right? What's the old trick? What's the old parent trick for things when it, okay, we've got somebody who says you could split it in thirds and share it with them. And somebody did come up with when you've got somebody who can handle a knife safely, then one cuts, right? And the other chooses. So that's what keeps the division honest. So those are all right. That divides up the orange. So that everybody gets, right? It's shared. So what's bad? What's wrong with that? The children get their position. They told you they needed the orange. They each get half the orange. Well, here's the interesting thing. And if you had asked the children, which is what one of the answers in the chat was, if you'd asked the children what they are going to do with the orange, you would have gotten an answer the obvious answer from one of the children, who would have said, I'm going to eat the orange. I'm hungry. It's snack time. I want an orange. I'm hungry. I like oranges. And the other child, though, says, actually, I need the rind because I'm baking. And for my recipe, I need orange rind. Now, if you ask and you find out what their interests are, right? The interests are the meat of the orange to eat it and the rind of the orange with which to bake. That's very different than their positions, which were, I need the orange. The position only gave you the surface, gave you part of the story. But the what question, what are you going to do with it, gave you the interests. And once you know the interests, then in fact, what you're able to do is to give each child, instead of 50% of what they want, 100% of what they want and need. So you can satisfy their interests 100%. There's no value left on the table. Everybody's gotten 100%. of what their interests are. Now, many things I understand are more complicated than an orange. Still, if you think about it, if you really get curious about what's under the surface, what's behind this position, what else is going on here? What does success look like? Right? Those magic how and what questions. Because the interesting thing about questions that start with the word how or what is that they are answered in sentences rather than yes or no. So options are parts of agreement or possible agreements that start finding ways to serve both parties' interests, to create value for both parties. And after you can create, you look at those common interests and you figure out how to maximize value along them, you're going to be more, you're going to end up with a better disposition of resources, right? You're going to increase the value. It's the whole idea of making the pie bigger, because you're thinking about things outside the immediate the immediate boundaries created by positions. So in the compensation discussion we were talking about, it might be that instead of a moving allowance, you get a signing bonus. If you're looking at what is a competitive, compensation, it might be that there's a bonus structure that's factored in rather than, a more conventional or typical salary. There may be a situation where it's possible that there's no commuting, subsidy, but there may be a more flexible work from home policy or remote work policy. Right? Those are, and that, it depending if the remote work terms are within the hiring manager's discretion, then that's something they can, right? That's something you can negotiate with them. If it's a policy that's in effect for the entire organization, that becomes more difficult. So every situation is going to be unique, but you want to begin to find that out. I mean, if somebody says, oh, it's company policy, you still want to dig a little deeper and be like, so that means that everybody in the organization, is always in the office 3 days a week. So the salespeople are in the office 3 days a week. Oh no, the salespeople, they're not in 3 days a week because they're on sales calls. Okay, so, oh, and and these other people, they're not in the office, every 3 days, every week because of X. They're in an average of 3 days a week. So it begins, you can begin to see where there might be flexibility that you were unaware of before you started digging a little deeper. Using the party's interests, which you've already thought of, right? It was part of your preparation, and then you're testing it when you're in the actual negotiation. So when you're in the engagement part, you've already got the interests, and nobody's going to agree to something that doesn't satisfy their interests. So using the party's interests as your criteria for evaluating options is going to be both efficient and effective. I save the mutually agreed criteria for dealing with things that become mutually exclusive. So for example, what is an acceptable, what is the market rate? What's a competitive salary number, right? That's going to be a function of finding out what's the criteria we're going to use. Are we going to use the criteria for, people for jobs in this market? Is, you think about what's the geographic criteria that you're going to use? What are the, size of the organization criteria that you're going to use? Those are the things you're going to negotiate about to figure out what the criteria are to help determine what the range is or what the salary should be. So the parties, but when you're looking at options, when you want to evaluate them, then go back to interests. Each party's interests are going to be dispositive. So what I've talked about are two legs of 3 legs in the stool of research. We talked a lot about interests, and that's a fundamental. So if you really think about interests and think about how you can get below the surface, how you can make that transition from talking about positions and thinking in terms of positions to really going below that and seeing the big, the much more interesting and larger expanse of interests for each party. That's crucial. We talked a little bit about options. And when you really start focusing on interests, then you're going to have a whole bunch more options to work with. There are more possibilities out there because the answer isn't yes or no. The answer is, what if we did this? What if we did this and this? What if we did this? What would this picture look like? Does this picture meet enough of your interests and mine to make it, acceptable? So that's what options do. So this is how you can reach me if you ever want to, and we can spend some time on questions.
I found that to be very, very, very helpful, especially when we are sometimes looking at kind of thinking we want something when we go in for whether it is a job interview or something else without realizing that there's some flexibility there. And if anyone here has any questions that they wanted to specifically ask Susan while we've got here, feel free to drop those in the chat. I had a couple that might get us started if you don't mind. And it's kind of going from the big picture and the sort of hypothetical or theoretical down to some nitty gritty, because I love the fact that what you're suggesting is that we do research before we go in to negotiate. And the example that you gave was about compensation or trying to figure out what your package might be when you're getting hired. Do you have any suggestions for where people might go to get that kind of information?
Yes, definitely. So, there's always the career services, part at Montgomery College that certainly is going to have resources and information. And we always, I know, do our research online. What you want to make sure is that you're getting useful and credible information when you do your online research. And the places where you're going to get that, one of them is salary.com. Because salary.com is using information that's provided by employers. Okay. So, and you can look at it, it gives you some geographical parameters. It gives you, job parameters, like the various positions. You want to find a position that's on salary.com that's going to be the closest to yours, and avoid limiting yourself to titles, right? I mean, because a content creation position might be being a producer. It might be being a writer. It might be editorial writing. It might be marketing writing. So you really want to look, into the description of what's required in the job to get a sense of whether, the content creator position you're interviewing for, where its best match is on salary.com. Another resource is payscale.com. So that can be, again, there's a compensation calculator that's helpful, and there are also some information about positions that can feed into ranges as you're developing what the salary range is. And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? They also have information, and that's a little more of a rabbit hole when you go down there to figure things out, but you're going to get, obviously very well vetted information. So again, very credible when you're then going back to a potential employer or going back to your current employer when you're talking about what the range is for a promotion, right? For the new position.
Those are some great sources. Thank you. And there is a question here in the chat. When we want someone to feel like they have negotiated away a rib, which you had talked about before, how do you do that?
Well, it can, I certainly want you to be ethical all the time, but I think that how you emphasize something, I think you want to treat the things you compromise on as valuable. So, you may not have cared a whole lot whether there was a commuting subsidy or not, right? But if you're dealing with a very competitive negotiator and they're like, well, here's the first thing I would say: avoid giving anything up until you have a better sense of what kind of a negotiator you're dealing with, right? What their personality is. Are they highly competitive? Are they more cooperative? So where are they going to be on the collaborative to competitive scale? So kind of suss that out through through the way they approach things and get a feel for that. The second thing is you should agree, you should be giving up nothing without getting something. Right. And like in cards or any strategy game, right? It's a strat. You want to give up low value things in return for things that are high value to you. And the value is determined by interests. And remember that while you may have shared interests, you and your counterparty may also have complementary interests. So there may be things that you want that are of low value to them. So you want to, make sure that you've thought and prepared about what are the things you can give up. I mean, think about when you're buying a house, right? You're going to have this list of things you want that you really want the house to have: fenced in backyard, fireplace, I don't know, central air conditioning, whatever these things are. And as you begin to, look at houses and you're, you're deciding whether you're going to make an offer or not, maybe the house doesn't have a fireplace. Are you willing to give that up? Is that a high priority item or a low priority interest for you? So those are the kinds of things you have to decide in terms of, if the house has everything else you want, it's still lacking a fireplace. Is the 80% that it gets you there okay? Or is the fireplace so important to you that it's the deal breaker on the house? Only you can answer that question. Well, and if you're buying the house with somebody else, then that's a whole nother negotiation. But I'm just saying, even for yourself, only you can answer that.
That's great. And that brings up the point that sometimes we do have to walk away from negotiations if it looks like it's not going to meet enough of the interests that we have, which I think is also important, particularly when you're looking for a job. You still, if something just is not going to meet the needs that you have, then you might have to walk away with it. There might be a stopping point. And then the other thing that you talked about in terms of that sort of cycle, you talked about practice. And again, using the example that you are suggesting, we have, a common practice is to do sort of a mock interview. Is that something that you might recommend? And then are there any suggestions that you have for how you might go about that practice session?
Sure. I do actually, when I'm coaching people, one of the things I think is really valuable is to have a mock, to have a mock negotiation, particularly if it's a situation that you're anxious about or unsure about, or it's really important to you. The more rehearsing you can do before you walk in the room, the better it'll be. And if you've got limited time, I would say, and you still somebody who's willing to do it with you, that what you want to do is have them be you and you be your counterparty. All right. So in that first round of practice of rehearsing, you're going to play your counterparty. So you'll coach your friend or, whoever it is in what you want, right? And what your interests are and what you think, what options and what order you want to put them out, or all those things. And then you play your counterparty. And the reason, there are a couple different reasons for this. One is, I'll tell you time and again, put yourself in your counterparty's shoes, right? You want to know what, you want to really think about what their interests are. You really want to think about where they're coming from, all that stuff. But until you actually have to play your counterparty, that's when the rubber hits the road, right? The second thing is that, right? You've prepared your options, you've prepared your interests, you know what you're going to say, and it's absolutely persuasive and it's going to, nail it. Well, the funny thing is that when you hear somebody else say it, maybe it doesn't sound quite as, absolutely convincing as it was when you said it to yourself. So there's some reality checking and some empathy that goes into that reversal, that role reversal, that can be very helpful.
That's brilliant. I'm going to put that into practice immediately. Thank you. And there's one final question from one of our guests tonight, and that is from Denise. And she asks, is there a tip on how to deal with a competitive negotiator?
It's what I said earlier. All right. So if you're dealing with somebody who's competitive, then you need you need them to feel like they're winning. All right. And the key is to let them feel like they're winning without you doing something that really causes you to lose. So what you're giving up are low value, things of relatively low value to you, to your interests, low value interests. But you have them, you don't tell them these are low value interests. You treat them like high value interests. All your interests are high value.
That's okay. That's good. That's good. So a lot about just having some trying to put yourself in the shoes of the person you're negotiating with. It sounds like is another theme that might be running through this that I think is really going to be valuable.